Adrian had always believed that life was a mix of hard work, luck, and the people you surrounded yourself with. Growing up, he had watched his mother, Eleanor, work tirelessly to give him a life full of love and opportunities. She had a warmth about her, a way of making anyone feel at ease in her presence. Even as a child, Adrian noticed how people would gravitate towards her, drawn by her kindness and gentle smile. She had taught him early on that respect and compassion were more valuable than money or status. Now in his mid-30s, Adrian was a self-made billionaire, someone who had built a business empire from the ground up. He traveled constantly, attended countless meetings, and made decisions that affected thousands of employees. Despite the pressures of his work, he made it a point to return home whenever he could. His home was not just a residence. It was a sanctuary filled with laughter, warmth, and memories that he cherished. And at the heart of that sanctuary was Eleanor, his mother. She was no longer young, but her spirit remained unshaken. Her days were often filled with quiet routines, gardening, reading, or cooking meals for those she loved. Adrian always found comfort in knowing that no matter where life took him, he could come home to her gentle presence. Adrian had been engaged for a few months now to a woman he had met at a charity gala. She was stunning, articulate, and carried herself with confidence. Everyone around them seemed to admire her, and Adrian himself had been captivated by her elegance. Their relationship had been filled with grand gestures, romantic trips, and luxurious experiences. At first, everything seemed like a fairy tale. Adrian believed he had found someone who complemented his life, and who could fit into the world he had built around him. He imagined a future where they would grow together, sharing love, family, and the joys of life. At home, Eleanor had met his fiancé a few times. Each encounter was polite and formal, and on the surface it seemed everything was going smoothly. Eleanor, with her natural intuition, had tried to see past the charm to understand the woman who would become part of her family. She observed carefully, noticing little details in her behavior, her reactions to different situations, and how she treated others around her. Eleanor had always believed that true character revealed itself not in grand moments but in quiet ones. The way a person spoke to someone who couldn't benefit them, the patience they showed in minor frustrations, the respect they extended to those older or less powerful. These were the things she noticed and valued. Adrian, on the other hand, had been so enamored by the excitement and beauty of his engagement that he didn't pay as much attention to these subtle cues. He was caught up in the romance, the admiration of friends, and the idea of having someone to share his success with. He often imagined evenings spent in laughter, holidays spent traveling, and the joy of building a life together. In these moments, it was easy for him to overlook anything that might hint at imperfections in the person he had chosen. Despite this, Eleanor continued to observe quietly. She never spoke harshly or tried to interfere. She simply watched, listened, and formed her own understanding. She had always believed in giving people a chance, but also in trusting her instincts. And her instincts had a way of noticing the things others might miss. She noticed the subtle impatience in his fiancé's tone when things didn't go her way, the tiny sighs of frustration when Eleanor would suggest something small or ask a question, the way her smile sometimes didn't reach her eyes. None of these things were overtly alarming, but they were there, like small cracks forming in what appeared to be a perfect facade. Adrian, meanwhile, was preparing for a weekend gathering at his home. He wanted to bring together a few close friends, family, and colleagues to celebrate his engagement. The house was buzzing with activity as staff arranged flowers, prepared meals, and ensured that every detail was perfect. Adrian felt a sense of pride as he walked through his home, seeing everything coming together. This home had always been a place of comfort, and now it was a place where he wanted to celebrate a milestone in his life. As he moved through the rooms, he paused to check in on Eleanor. She was in the kitchen, arranging flowers in a vase, humming softly to herself. Adrian smiled at her, feeling that familiar warmth. "Everything okay, Mom?" he asked. Eleanor looked up and returned his smile, though there was a trace of concern in her eyes that she tried to hide. "Everything's fine, dear. Just making sure the house looks nice for your guests," she replied. Her voice was calm, composed, and filled with the quiet strength that had always grounded Adrian. The guests began to arrive, and the evening unfolded with laughter, clinking glasses, and conversations that ranged from casual updates to shared memories. Adrian was in his element, moving from group to group, ensuring everyone was comfortable, sharing stories, and enjoying the company. His fiancée was at his side, radiating charm and grace, engaging with everyone, and drawing attention effortlessly. On the surface, it was exactly the celebration he had envisioned. However, Eleanor couldn't help but notice a shift in the interactions. While everyone else seemed captivated by his fiancée's presence, there were moments when her tone would slip, just slightly, when speaking to Eleanor. A comment, a laugh that felt a bit sharp, a dismissive glance, small things that spoke louder than the smiles and pleasantries. Eleanor's heart ached slightly, but she chose to maintain her composure. She had learned long ago that dignity often spoke louder than confrontation. She continued to host, to serve, and to be present, all while quietly observing. Adrian, wrapped up in the joy of the evening, failed to notice these subtle cues. He was busy greeting friends, making small talk, and basking in the excitement of the celebration. It wasn't until a brief moment alone with Eleanor, while checking on a final detail for the gathering, that he noticed her expression. There was a flicker of something, worry, sadness, unease, that caught his attention. "Mom, what's wrong?" he asked gently. Eleanor looked at him and hesitated. She wanted to protect him from unnecessary worry, yet she also felt the need to be honest. "Nothing, Adrian. Everything's fine," she said softly, though her eyes lingered on his fiancée across the room. Adrian, sensing her hesitation, simply nodded but made a mental note to pay closer attention. He trusted his mother's instincts and knew that if she had a concern, it was worth considering. The night continued, filled with moments of joy and laughter. Yet beneath the surface, a quiet tension lingered. Eleanor remained composed, smiling when needed, engaging politely and maintaining her warmth. But her mind kept returning to the subtle signs she had noticed. Adrian, blissfully unaware, continued to enjoy the evening, caught up in the charm and excitement of his engagement. He was confident, successful, and on the verge of a new chapter in his life, completely unaware that small cracks had begun to form in what he believed was a perfect foundation. As the gathering came to a close, guests began to depart, offering congratulations, hugs, and well wishes. Adrian walked his fiancée to the door, thanking everyone for coming. Once the house was quiet, he finally allowed himself a moment to breathe, feeling a sense of contentment and accomplishment. He turned to Eleanor, ready to share a quiet moment together. But before he could, he noticed something. A subtle shift in the way his fiancée was speaking to her mother-in-law, a tone just slightly sharper, a glance that lingered longer than necessary. It was fleeting, almost imperceptible, but enough to stir a seed of unease in Adrian's mind. Eleanor caught his gaze and offered a small, reassuring smile, though her eyes told a different story. Adrian returned the smile, unsure of what to make of it, and decided to brush it off, telling himself that perhaps he was imagining things. He spent the rest of the evening reflecting on the celebration, thinking about the future, and feeling grateful for the love that had always surrounded him. He had built a life filled with achievement, comfort, and ambition, and he believed that sharing it with someone who seemed perfect for him was the natural next step. Little did he know, the journey ahead would challenge everything he thought he knew about love, respect, and the people he held closest to his heart. This evening, which seemed so perfect, was only the beginning of a story that would test the bonds of family, reveal hidden truths, and ultimately shape the course of his life in ways he could never have imagined. Adrian returned from a business trip one Thursday afternoon, earlier than expected, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and relief. He had been away for several days, attending meetings, signing contracts, and negotiating deals. As much as he loved his work, he missed the quiet comfort of home, especially the presence of his mother, Eleanor. He looked forward to spending a peaceful afternoon with her, maybe sitting in the garden with a cup of tea, talking about life, or simply enjoying the calm. When he parked his car in the driveway, he noticed a flicker of unusual activity inside the house. Normally, the hallways were quiet and calm when he arrived unexpectedly, but this time he could hear raised voices, tension in the air. Adrian's steps quickened, and a feeling of unease started to creep over him. He had never felt the need to rush home like this before, but something instinctively told him to go inside immediately. As he opened the front door, the scene that unfolded before him stopped him in his tracks. Vanessa, his fiancée, was standing in the living room, her face flushed with anger. She was pointing a finger and speaking in a voice that was louder and sharper than Adrian had ever heard from her. Eleanor stood nearby, her hands folded, her eyes soft but wary. She was trying to respond calmly, but her voice was gentle and strained as if she were holding back tears. Adrian froze for a moment, taking in the scene. He had never seen Vanessa behave like this, and the sight of his mother being on the receiving end of such harshness shocked him to his core. His mind raced, trying to comprehend what was happening. He stepped further inside, clearing his throat, and finally spoke up. "Vanessa, what's going on here?" he asked, his voice steady but tinged with surprise. Vanessa turned her head, clearly caught off guard by his early return. Her eyes narrowed slightly, and there was a flash of frustration, quickly replaced by a forced smile. I was just explaining something to your mother," she said, her tone still sharp, though slightly softened under his gaze. Adrian's heart pounded. He could see that Eleanor's composure was strained, but she still maintained her gentle demeanor. "Explaining?" Adrian asked, stepping closer. "You sound like you're yelling. Mom, are you okay?" Eleanor managed a small smile, shaking her head slightly. "I'm fine, Adrian, we were having a small disagreement," she said softly. Though the tension in her voice was clear, Adrian's eyes flicked back to Vanessa, who was frowning, her hands gesturing in frustration. "It's nothing serious," Eleanor added quickly, trying to diffuse the situation. Adrian took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of anger, disbelief, and protectiveness. He had imagined that if there was ever a disagreement, it would be calm, respectful, and quickly resolved. This, however, was far from what he expected. He stepped forward, placing a hand lightly on Eleanor's shoulder. "Mom, I want you to be honest with me. Tell me exactly what happened," he said, his voice firm but gentle. Eleanor hesitated, looking from her son to Vanessa. She didn't want to make things worse, but she also didn't want Adrian to ignore what had happened. Adrian, she was raising her voice at me over something small, Eleanor said carefully. I tried to explain, but she didn't seem to want to listen. I think she was frustrated, and it came out in a way that hurt me. Adrian's jaw tightened. He felt a wave of protectiveness and disbelief. He had trusted Vanessa, believed in her kindness and patience, and now he was confronted with a side of her he hadn't seen. He turned to Vanessa, trying to keep his voice calm but firm. "Vanessa, is that true? Were you really yelling at my mother?" Vanessa's lips pressed together, and she looked away for a moment. I was just trying to make a point," she said, her voice defensive. She wasn't listening, and I had to be firm. Adrian could hear the edge in her tone, the lack of genuine remorse. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This wasn't about a difference of opinion or a minor misunderstanding. This was about respect, or rather the lack of it. Adrian took a step closer, his eyes locked on Vanessa. "Vanessa, this is my mother we're talking about. She raised me, she loves me, and she's never hurt anyone. You don't get to speak to her like that. Not in my house and not in my life," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Vanessa opened her mouth to respond, but he raised a hand, signaling that he wanted to hear no excuses at the moment. Eleanor watched quietly, her eyes filled with both pride and sorrow. She had always taught Adrian to stand up for what was right, and now he was embodying that lesson perfectly. She felt a sense of relief knowing her son was defending her. But it also pained her to see that the woman he loved was showing such a harsh side. Vanessa finally spoke, her voice tinged with frustration and defensiveness. "I didn't mean to hurt her, Adrian. I wanted to make sure she understood my point. She can be stubborn sometimes," she said, trying to justify her actions. Adrian felt his heart sink further. This wasn't a one-time lapse or a minor mistake. This was an attitude, a way of thinking that allowed her to dismiss and raise her voice to someone who deserved respect. Adrian turned to Eleanor, his eyes softening. "Mom, I'm so sorry you had to go through that." "You don't deserve it," he said, his voice filled with emotion. Eleanor reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "It's okay, dear. I'm fine, really. I want to make sure you see her true side before it goes too far," she said. Her words carried both love and caution, a quiet warning that Adrian couldn't ignore. Adrian felt a surge of responsibility. He had always believed in giving people chances, but this was different. This was about his family, about respect, and about the kind of life he wanted to build. He realized that appearances could be deceiving, and charm and beauty were not substitutes for character. He had to see this clearly, without letting his feelings cloud his judgment. He looked at Vanessa, who was still standing there, frowning slightly, her arms crossed. Vanessa, I need you to understand something very clearly. This behavior is not acceptable. Not to my mother, not in my house, not in my life. I need to know if you can truly respect her, because if you can't, then we need to reconsider everything, he said firmly. His words were calm, but there was no mistaking the seriousness behind them. Vanessa's eyes widened slightly, and she hesitated. She opened her mouth to respond, but didn't say anything for a long moment. Adrian could see the tension in her face, the struggle between pride, frustration, and the realization that she had crossed a line. Eleanor watched quietly, her hands folded in her lap, her expression gentle but attentive. She had always hoped that her son's fiancé would treat her with kindness, but she had also prepared herself for the possibility that things might not be as perfect as they seemed. Adrian took a deep breath, trying to steady his thoughts. He needed clarity, honesty, and a clear understanding of who Vanessa truly was. I want the truth, Vanessa. Can you respect my mother genuinely without raising your voice, without belittling her? Can you do that? He asked, his eyes searching hers. Vanessa looked away, her jaw tight. She said, I suppose I can try. But Adrian could sense the lack of conviction in her words. This wasn't a heartfelt promise. It was a reluctant concession. Adrian's heart sank. He had hoped for a clear, sincere answer, but instead he was met with hesitation and defensiveness. Eleanor reached out and gently touched Adrian's arm. It's okay, Adrian. You don't have to decide anything right now, just observe and trust what you see, she said softly. Her words were wise and measured, reminding him that actions always reveal more than words. Adrian nodded, understanding that he needed to pay attention to the future interactions between them. He couldn't rely on appearances or charm anymore. The rest of the afternoon passed with an uneasy calm. Vanessa tried to compose herself, speaking more softly, but the earlier tension lingered like a shadow. Adrian focused on spending time with his mother, walking in the garden, talking quietly, and enjoying the familiar comfort that had always been his refuge. Eleanor shared stories from her past, offered gentle advice, and reminded him of the values that had shaped his life. Adrian felt grateful for her presence, even as his mind continued to churn over what had happened. By the evening, Adrian had made a silent promise to himself. He would pay close attention, observe, and not ignore the signs. Respect, kindness, and compassion were non-negotiable in his life, especially when it came to his family. He knew that this incident was only the beginning, a glimpse into a reality he had to face and understand. As he sat quietly in the living room, watching Eleanor move about the room with her gentle grace, he realized that life was about more than appearances and charm. It was about the people who truly mattered, the bonds that could withstand challenges, and the ability to recognize and address the truth, no matter how difficult it might be. Adrian woke up the next morning with a heavy heart. The events of the previous day replayed in his mind like a scene he couldn't escape. He had seen his fiancée yell at his mother, the woman who had sacrificed everything for him. It wasn't just the tone of Vanessa's voice or the words she used. It was the complete lack of respect that had shaken him. For the first time since their relationship began, he questioned everything. He sat in silence at the breakfast table, staring at the cup of coffee Eleanor had made for him. She moved quietly around the kitchen, pretending as if nothing had happened. That was her way. She avoided conflict whenever possible. She didn't want to make him uncomfortable, but her silence said more than words ever could. Adrian noticed how she tried to hide the faint sadness in her eyes. It hurt him deeply. "Mom," he finally said softly, "I'm sorry for what happened yesterday." Eleanor turned to him, offering a gentle smile. "You don't have to apologize for someone else's behavior, dear," she said. "I'm fine, really." But Adrian could tell she was saying that to keep the peace. He knew her better than anyone. "I just didn't expect that side of her," Adrian admitted. "I thought I knew her well." Eleanor placed her hand on his shoulder and said, "People show who they really are when no one is watching, Adrian. Maybe yesterday was just a glimpse of something you needed to see." Her words stayed with him. He didn't respond, but he felt their truth. That day he decided to pay closer attention, to notice the details he had overlooked. Love could make people blind, and he realized he might have been seeing only what he wanted to see. Later that morning, Vanessa came downstairs, dressed elegantly as always, her expression carefully composed. She acted as if the previous day had never happened. "Good morning," she said lightly, as though everything was fine. Eleanor greeted her politely but without her usual warmth. Adrian noticed the distance immediately. Vanessa poured herself a cup of coffee and sat beside him, smiling. "You're quiet today," she said, touching his arm gently. "Is everything all right?" Adrian nodded, his eyes fixed on her. "I'm fine," he said simply. "Just thinking." Vanessa tilted her head and said, "About work?" He hesitated for a moment. "About yesterday," he replied. Her smile faded slightly and her expression stiffened. "Oh," she said, sounding uncomfortable. "I told you it was just a misunderstanding," Adrian sighed. "Vanessa, it wasn't just a misunderstanding. You were yelling at my mother. That's not something I can ignore." She frowned, looking slightly irritated. "You're exaggerating." "I wasn't yelling. I was raising my voice because she wasn't listening. She was being unfair." Adrian looked at her in disbelief. "Unfair? She's the kindest person I know. She didn't deserve to be spoken to like that." Vanessa crossed her arms and said, "I didn't mean to disrespect her, Adrian. But she talks to me like I'm a child sometimes. I just wanted to stand my ground." Eleanor, who had been quietly preparing breakfast, pretended not to hear, but her shoulders tensed. She was too dignified to argue, but Adrian could feel her discomfort. He didn't want to embarrass her further, so he lowered his voice. "We'll talk about this later," he said to Vanessa. She nodded stiffly and went to the dining room, clearly upset. The rest of the day was filled with quiet tension. Adrian went to his office but found it hard to focus. He kept replaying the argument in his head. Something about Vanessa's attitude disturbed him. It wasn't just about the yelling, it was the lack of remorse. She didn't seem to understand how serious it was. He stayed at work longer than usual, using business meetings as an excuse to clear his head. But no matter how much he tried to focus on numbers and contracts, his thoughts kept drifting back home. When he finally returned that evening, the atmosphere in the house felt heavy. Eleanor was reading in her favorite chair, and she looked up when he entered. "You look tired," she said softly. "I am," he admitted. "It's been a long day." Vanessa appeared from the other room, dressed beautifully as if she were going out. "I was thinking we could have dinner out tonight," she said, her tone upbeat. Adrian looked at her, trying to read her expression. He wasn't sure if this was her way of smoothing things over or simply avoiding the issue. "I think I'd rather eat at home tonight," he said. Vanessa's smile faltered for a second, but she quickly recovered. "All right," she said. "Maybe tomorrow, then." She walked off to check her phone, leaving him with his mother. Eleanor looked at him quietly. "You're thinking about it, aren't you?" she asked gently. Adrian nodded. "I can't stop," he said. "I keep wondering if I've made a mistake." Eleanor closed her book and looked at him seriously. "Only you can answer that. But remember, respect is something you can't teach someone. Either they have it or they don't." Her words struck him deeply. Adrian knew she was right. Over the next few days, he became more observant. He noticed small things, how Vanessa spoke to the staff, how she reacted when things didn't go her way, how quickly her patience ran out. None of it was loud or dramatic, but it was there, tiny moments that revealed more about her character than her polished smile ever could. One afternoon, he watched as Vanessa snapped at one of the housekeepers for bringing the wrong brand of bottled water. The housekeeper apologized softly, but Vanessa's tone remained cold. Adrian stood quietly in the doorway, unseen, feeling a pang of disappointment. He couldn't help but compare her behavior to his mother's. Eleanor had always treated everyone with kindness, no matter their role. That night, when the house was quiet, Adrian found himself sitting with Eleanor again. They didn't talk much, but the silence between them was comfortable. Finally, Eleanor spoke. "You know, Adrian, love isn't just about how someone makes you feel when things are good. It's about how they behave when things aren't." He looked at her, nodding slowly. "I understand, Mom, I really do." The next day, he decided to have a direct conversation with Vanessa. He wanted to give her a chance to be honest and reflect. They sat in the living room facing each other. "Vanessa," he began, "I've been thinking a lot about what happened with my mother. I need you to tell me the truth." "Do you regret it?" Vanessa hesitated, her eyes flicking toward the window. "I regret that it upset you," she said carefully. "But I still think she was out of line." Adrian stared at her, realizing she still didn't understand. "You don't get to speak about her that way," he said quietly. "She's never disrespected you. She's always tried to welcome you. Vanessa's voice grew colder. Maybe she just doesn't like me. Maybe she thinks I'm not good enough for you. Adrian shook his head. That's not true. She wanted to love you like family, but you never gave her the chance. There was a long pause between them. The air felt heavy. The silence filled with everything left unsaid. Adrian looked at her, searching for even a hint of humility, but he saw none. He realized then that maybe love alone wasn't enough. He had always believed he could build a happy future with Vanessa, but now he wasn't sure. When Vanessa finally spoke again, her voice was softer but still defensive. I'll try to be more patient, she said. If that's what you want, Adrian sighed. It's not about what I want. It's about respect, about kindness. That's the foundation of everything. He stood up, feeling drained. I need some time to think. Vanessa looked surprised but didn't argue. She simply nodded and left the room. Adrian stayed there, staring out the window, thinking about his life, his choices, and the future he had imagined. He loved her once, but he wasn't sure if love could survive without mutual respect. Later that night, Eleanor quietly entered the room. She could see the sadness in her son's eyes. It's hard, isn't it? She said softly. Adrian nodded. It is. I just never thought I'd see this day. Eleanor sat beside him, placing her hand on his. Sometimes life shows us the truth in painful ways, but it's better to see it now than later. Adrian looked at her and managed a small smile. You're right, Mom, as always. He knew what he had to do next wouldn't be easy, but he also knew that doing nothing would only lead to regret. He had seen enough to understand that not every beautiful thing was built to last, and as much as it hurt, he realized that protecting his mother's peace and preserving his own values mattered more than pretending everything was perfect. That night, as the house grew quiet and the lights dimmed, Adrian sat alone thinking about the future. He had a choice to make, between holding on to something that looked perfect from the outside and letting it go for the sake of what was right. He knew his decision would change everything, but for the first time he was ready to face it with clarity. Adrian spent many nights thinking about what he had seen that afternoon. The image of Vanessa yelling at his mother would not leave his mind. He tried to find reasons, tried to make sense of it, but nothing could justify the tone or the look in her eyes. His heart wanted to believe that it was a one-time mistake, but his instincts told him otherwise. There was something about that moment that had peeled away a layer he had never seen before. Eleanor, his mother, carried herself with quiet grace in the days that followed. She did not complain or bring up what had happened. She continued with her small routines, watering the plants, reading her favorite books, and preparing tea for Adrian when he came home. But Adrian noticed the change in her smile. It no longer reached her eyes. There was a small hesitation in her laughter, a soft silence that followed every time Vanessa's name came up. One evening, Adrian sat with his mother on the porch, watching the sunset. The golden light touched Eleanor's face, showing both the years of wisdom and the gentle sadness she tried to hide. He finally spoke, his voice low and full of emotion. Mother, I saw what happened that day, he said. You don't need to pretend it didn't hurt. Eleanor looked down for a moment, then gave a faint smile. I know you did, my son. But I didn't want to burden you. I know you love her. Adrian sighed deeply. Love shouldn't make anyone feel small, and no one should ever raise their voice at you. Eleanor reached over and gently patted his hand. People show their true hearts in moments of anger. What you saw is who she truly is, Adrian. Don't close your eyes to that truth just because it's painful. Her words hit him harder than he expected. Adrian realized his mother was right. He had been trying to protect an image of Vanessa that no longer existed. He had built a dream around someone who did not respect the one person who mattered most to him. The next few days, Adrian decided to step back from Vanessa. He didn't confront her immediately. Instead, he observed. He noticed how she treated others, the staff at the house, the waiters at restaurants, even strangers in passing. There was always a certain sharpness in her tone, a quiet arrogance hiding behind her charm. To everyone else, she appeared polished and perfect, but Adrian had begun to see the cracks. One evening, they attended a charity dinner together. The hall was filled with important guests, business leaders, artists, and old family friends. Vanessa dazzled the room, her laughter echoing as cameras flashed. But as they sat down for dinner, Adrian noticed her expression shift when his mother approached their table. Eleanor greeted her kindly, but Vanessa barely offered a smile. When Eleanor accidentally spilled a few drops of water, Vanessa's eyes rolled and she whispered something under her breath that only Adrian caught. It was cold and cutting. That was the moment he knew. The love he had imagined was no longer there. Respect was gone, and without it, everything else felt hollow. That night, Adrian could not sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing through memories. Every kind gesture, every word Vanessa had once said, and how different she seemed now. He remembered how his mother had always taught him that character mattered more than charm. People can wear masks, she had said once, but time and truth always remove them. The next morning, Adrian asked Vanessa to meet him for breakfast. They sat across from each other in the garden. The air was calm, but tension hung between them. "Vanessa," Adrian began gently, "I want to talk about something important." She looked up from her phone, a little impatient. "What is it?" "I saw how you spoke to my mother. Not just once, but several times. I've noticed how you treat people when you think no one is watching. It's not who I thought you were." Vanessa frowned, her tone turning defensive. "Oh, come on, Adrian. Your mother is too sensitive." "I didn't mean anything. Why are you making it sound so serious?" "It is serious," Adrian said firmly. "She's my mother, and she deserves respect." Vanessa crossed her arms. "Are we really going to argue about this? I'm under stress all the time. Sometimes people annoy me. That doesn't mean I'm a bad person." Adrian stayed silent for a moment, watching her face. He realized she wasn't sorry. There was no guilt, no sign of understanding. Only frustration that she had been caught. He finally said, "You may not see it, but how you treat her shows me the kind of heart you have. And I can't ignore that anymore." Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "So what are you saying? You're choosing your mother over me?" Adrian looked at her calmly. "I'm choosing what's right." The silence that followed was heavy. Vanessa scoffed, stood up, and walked away without saying another word. Adrian sat there for a long time, feeling both heartbroken and strangely relieved. He knew a storm was coming, but he also knew he could not build a future on a foundation of disrespect. Later that day, he went to see his mother. She was in the garden again, trimming flowers. When she saw him, she smiled softly, but her eyes searched his face, sensing something had changed. "I talked to her," Adrian said quietly. Eleanor nodded, her hands pausing for a moment. "And what did she say?" "She said it wasn't a big deal," he replied. "But it is. It always was." Eleanor sighed, setting down the scissors. "You have a good heart, my son. You see people for who they can be, not just who they are. But some people don't want to change. You can't teach kindness, it must come from within." Adrian looked around at the blooming flowers. Each one had taken time, care, and patience to grow. He realized love was the same. It required respect and nurturing. Without those things, it would wither, no matter how beautiful it looked on the outside. That evening, Vanessa called him. Her tone had softened. She apologized for the argument, saying she was just stressed and that she didn't mean to hurt his mother. Adrian listened quietly, but the words felt empty. He wanted to believe her, but something in her voice didn't feel real. It was as if she was more afraid of losing the comfort of his world than of losing him. After the call, he went to his study and sat in silence. He thought about all the people who had come into his life over the years. Some had stayed, some had left. But his mother had always been there. She had stood by him through every high and low. The least he could do was stand by her now. Days turned into weeks, and the distance between Adrian and Vanessa grew. They still met occasionally, but the warmth was gone. Conversations turned cold, smiles felt forced. Even friends began to notice. The once perfect couple no longer looked at each other the same way. One evening, Adrian found himself walking through the city alone. The streets were bright with lights, and people hurried past him, laughing and talking. For the first time in a long while, he felt like just another man. Someone who had to make a choice between love and truth. He stopped by a small cafe, ordered a cup of tea, and watched the world go by. He thought about his mother's quiet strength, her patience, and the way she never let bitterness change her heart. When he returned home, Eleanor was waiting for him with a gentle smile. "Did you find what you were looking for?" she asked softly. Adrian smiled faintly. "I think I did. I found clarity." She nodded knowingly. "Then hold on to that. The heart knows what the mind tries to ignore." As he sat beside her, he realized that peace didn't come from pretending everything was fine. It came from facing the truth, no matter how painful. Vanessa had shown him who she truly was. and now it was up to him to decide what kind of future he wanted to build. He looked out at the night sky, the stars shining quietly above. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of calm. The next step would not be easy, but it would be honest. And that, he knew, was what mattered most. Adrian woke up early the next morning, feeling the weight of his decision resting on his chest. The sun was rising slowly, painting the sky with soft shades of orange and pink. It was beautiful, peaceful, and it reminded him of how his life had once felt, before the arguments, before the doubt. He stood by the window, thinking about everything that had happened over the last few weeks. He had seen enough to know that love without respect was an empty promise. As he walked downstairs, he found his mother already in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. She moved slowly, humming softly as she arranged the plates. There was something about her calm presence that always grounded him. She turned and smiled when she saw him. "You're up early," she said. "I couldn't sleep," Adrian replied. "There's something I need to do today." Eleanor looked at him thoughtfully. "I know," she said gently. "And whatever you decide, make sure it brings you peace." Adrian nodded, appreciating her quiet wisdom. He had spent days thinking, weighing his feelings, and now he knew what needed to be done. He couldn't let fear or habit tie him to someone who had no kindness in her heart. It wasn't about pride or revenge, it was about peace, respect, and truth. Later that afternoon, he called Vanessa and asked her to meet him at his favorite cafe. It was the same place where they had shared their first lunch together. Back then, everything had felt light and full of promise. Now the air between them carried an unspoken tension. When Vanessa arrived, she looked as radiant as ever, dressed elegantly with her usual confidence. She smiled faintly, but there was a nervous edge in her expression. "You sounded serious on the phone," she said, sitting down across from him. Adrian gave a small nod. "I wanted to talk without interruptions." She leaned forward slightly. "Is this about your mother again?" "Because I already told you." He raised a hand gently to stop her. "It's not just about my mother. It's about everything. I've been thinking a lot about us, about who we've become." Vanessa frowned. "What are you talking about?" "We're fine, Adrian. Every couple argues sometimes. You're just overthinking." Adrian looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "Do you really believe that raising your voice at someone who's done nothing but show kindness is normal? That treating people beneath you with arrogance is acceptable? Because I can't live in that kind of world." Her face tightened. "You're exaggerating. You're making me look like a villain when all I did was lose my temper once." Adrian sighed. "It wasn't just once, Vanessa. I've seen it more than once. You talk down to people when you think no one's paying attention. That's not love. That's not compassion. And it's not who I want to be with." Vanessa's tone sharpened. "So what, you're breaking up with me because I wasn't perfect with your mother? Is that it?" He met her eyes calmly. "I'm ending this because I can't marry someone who disrespects the person who gave me everything. My mother is kind, gentle, and she deserves nothing but respect. If you can't see that, then we're not meant to be together." For a few seconds, she didn't respond. Then her expression changed, anger mixed with disbelief. "You're going to regret this, Adrian," she said coldly. "You think your mother is some kind of saint, but no one's perfect. You're just blinded by guilt and sentiment." Adrian stayed quiet. There was no point in arguing. Her words only confirmed what he already knew. The woman he had once loved was not the person he thought she was. He stood up slowly and said, "Goodbye, Vanessa. I truly hope you find happiness, but this isn't the kind of life I want." He left the cafe, the sound of her voice fading behind him. As he walked down the street, the air felt different, lighter somehow. It was as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. For the first time in weeks, he could breathe freely. That evening, when he returned home, Eleanor was sitting by the window with her knitting. She looked up and saw the peace in his eyes. "It's done, isn't it?" she asked softly. Adrian nodded. "Yes, it's done." She set her knitting aside and stood to hug him. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "You did the right thing." Adrian hugged her tightly, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "You always taught me to choose what's right, even when it's hard," he said. Eleanor smiled gently. "Sometimes life tests us to see if we mean what we say. You passed that test, my son." The next few days were quiet. News of the breakup spread quickly through social circles, and people were shocked. Many couldn't believe that Adrian, one of the most admired men in business, had ended his engagement so suddenly. Some speculated, some whispered, but Adrian didn't care. He had made peace with his decision. He focused on his work again, but he also made more time for his mother. They took walks together, visited old family places, and even spent afternoons baking and laughing like they used to when he was younger. Those simple moments reminded him of what really mattered. One afternoon, Eleanor brought up something unexpected. "You know," she said, pouring tea, "maybe Vanessa wasn't meant to stay, but she taught you something important." Adrian looked curious. "What do you mean?" "She showed you what love isn't," Eleanor said with a small smile. "And that's just as valuable. Sometimes we have to meet the wrong people to truly appreciate the right ones." Adrian nodded slowly, realizing how true that was. Every experience, even the painful ones, had shaped him. He was stronger, wiser, and more aware now. Months passed, and life began to feel steady again. Adrian found joy in small things: the laughter of his employees, the kindness of strangers, the warmth of his mother's company. He started supporting charities for elderly care, inspired by what had happened. He wanted to make sure that people like his mother, kind, gentle souls, were treated with love and dignity everywhere. One evening, at a charity event for senior wellness, Adrian met someone new. She was helping organize the event, working quietly in the background. She wasn't flashy or loud, but her eyes held kindness. She helped an elderly guest find their seat with a smile that came from the heart. Adrian noticed the way she spoke to people, with patience and respect. It reminded him of his mother. They exchanged a few words later that night, and though it was just a short conversation, something about her sincerity stayed with him. It wasn't love at first sight, but it was something real, something peaceful. It felt like the beginning of a new chapter. When Adrian returned home that night, Eleanor was waiting up for him. "How was the event?" she asked. "It was wonderful," he said, smiling. "And I met someone interesting." Eleanor chuckled softly. "Oh, tell me about her." "She's different," Adrian said thoughtfully. "She reminded me that goodness still exists." His mother smiled knowingly. "Good hearts find each other, Adrian. It just takes time." As the days went by, Adrian and the woman began to meet more often. They shared stories, laughed, and discovered a quiet understanding between them. She admired the way he spoke about his mother, and he appreciated her genuine kindness. There were no grand gestures or dramatic declarations, just a slow, honest friendship that grew naturally. One morning, as Adrian watched his mother and the woman talking in the garden, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. The past no longer haunted him. It had become a lesson. He realized that true love isn't found in perfection or appearances. It's found in respect, patience, and kindness. He walked over to join them, smiling as the sunlight filtered through the trees. His mother looked at him with quiet pride, and in that moment, Adrian knew he had finally built the kind of life he always wanted, one filled with love that was real, gentle, and true. Years later, people would still remember the story of how the billionaire broke off his engagement, but Adrian never cared about the gossip. What mattered most was the peace he found within himself and the joy he shared with his mother. He had learned that money could buy comfort, but not character, and no amount of wealth could replace the warmth of a kind heart. Eleanor continued to live happily by his side, proud of the man her son had become. Every time she saw him smile, she knew he had chosen the right path. And for Adrian, that was the greatest success of all, the kind that no fortune could ever measure.